I lost consciousness with the agonizing reaction of a harsh substance burning through my throat, a devastating gesture delivered by my own mother. But when I opened my eyes, the fire was gone, and I was standing in the middle of a brightly lit bank. "What is taking you so long? Hurry up and withdraw the cash, or all the good properties in that new development will be snatched up." The harsh, demanding voices snapped me back to reality. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights of the bank, turning to see my mother, Martha, and my younger brother, David, standing right beside me. Their eyes were practically glued to the withdrawal slip in my trembling hand. I stared at the slip, then at their familiar yet suddenly foreign faces. The check was for $30,000, every single cent my husband Arthur and I had scraped together, over a lifetime of grueling labor. Without a word, I crumpled the slip, shoved it deep into my purse, and turned on my heel. Martha lunged forward, her claw-like fingers digging into my arm. "Where do you think you're going?" she hissed. David stepped into my path, physically blocking my exit. "Give me the money," he demanded, his hand outstretched with sickening entitlement. I didn't hesitate. I raised my hand and struck him across the cheek with every ounce of strength I had. The crack echoed through the quiet lobby, leaving them in stunned silence. I pushed through the glass doors, hailed a yellow cab, and left them in the dust. In my previous life, I had been the ultimate doormat, a glass child who sacrificed her own family at the altar of her younger brother. I gave David everything we owned. And what was my reward? Shortly after Arthur finally reached his breaking point and divorced me, I was diagnosed with a severe illness. As I lay wasting away in a sterile hospital bed, without a penny to my name for treatment, David couldn't even be bothered to show his face. My mother did visit, however. She came to my bedside and handed me a bottle of industrial cleaning chemical. Even through the fog of rebirth, I could perfectly recall the disgust twisting her features. "Die early, and get it over with," she had sneered, brushing her hands together, like she was dusting off dirt. "Getting a disease like this is bad luck. Don't you dare stick around and let your bad karma ruin your brother's financial prosperity." In my absolute despair, the truth finally shattered my delusion. When that substance slid down my throat, the searing, boiling agony felt like it was burning a hole straight through my chest. And I was consumed by a tsunami of pure, unadulterated hatred. I wanted to become a vengeful spirit and hold them accountable, but heaven had a different plan. It gave me a second chance. I arrived back at the place we called home, a cramped, 300 square foot 1 bedroom apartment in a run-down neighborhood on the wrong side of the tracks. All four of us were suffocating in this tiny box. For years, Arthur drove a cab through the dangerous night shifts, while I ran a hot dog cart outside the local high school. We had bled and sweated to save that $30,000. It was supposed to be the down payment on a modest house of our own. But in my past life, because I was hopelessly conditioned to serve my brother, I handed the entire sum over to David. David bought a beautiful suburban home, while my family continued to rot in this claustrophobic rental year after year. Because we didn't live in a good district, my twins were forced to attend an underfunded, failing public school. My son, Jason, eventually dropped out and went to work on a construction site, where a horrific accident severely injured his leg, requiring major surgery. The contractor paid a $15,000 settlement for my son's injury, and I ruthlessly turned around and lent that compensation money to David to open a warehouse. My daughter Mia was brilliant. She earned a scholarship to the city's most prestigious magnet school, but I forced her to give up her hard-earned spot so my niece, Chloe, could take it instead. Chloe used that elite education to get into a top university, married a wealthy trust fund heir, and moved to Europe, living the life of a pampered socialite. Meanwhile, my Mia was thrown into a rough public high school, where she was harshly targeted. The torment triggered severe depression. She was forced to drop out, married a violent widower who mistreated her terribly, and eventually suffered a total mental collapse that ended with her locked away in a care facility. The memories hit me so hard my knees buckled. I raised my hands and viciously tapped my own cheeks, again and again, punishing myself for the monsters I had let destroy my children. Just as my hand fell, the front door clicked open, I didn't even have time to compose my tear-stained face before I met Arthur's exhausted, disgusted gaze. "What kind of crazy stunt are you pulling now?" he asked. His voice deadened by years of disappointment. I stared at Arthur, my vision blurring. After our divorce in my past life, I had never seen him again. He was 50 years old, just a year older than me. But the man standing in the doorway had a head full of stark white hair, his shoulders stooped under the crushing weight of poverty, bending him like a drawn bow. He was 6 feet tall, but so emaciated a strong gust of wind could have blown him over. In my past life, it was around this time that Mia's depression became uncontrollable, and she was institutionalized. Jason, recovering from his physical injuries and drowning in despair, had turned to alcohol and video games to numb his reality, and yet, completely blind to my own family's ruin. My only concern had been that David's warehouse was short a delivery driver. I mercilessly pressured Arthur into working for David for absolutely zero pay. Arthur, a man who had silently endured a lifetime of my abuse, finally broke. He confronted me angrily, packed his bags and demanded a divorce. In response, I threw a massive tantrum, pawned off everything of value in our apartment for a few $100, and used the cash to buy my mother a gold necklace. Looking back at the catastrophic sins of my past life, I genuinely wondered if I had been possessed. There was no other explanation for such despicable, selfish, and catastrophic stupidity. Seeing me staring at him like a ghost, Arthur's brows knitted together. He stepped into the chaotic apartment, silently set down his thermos, picked up a broom, and began sweeping the floor. I snapped out of my trance, lunged forward, and snatched the broom from his hands. Pointing toward the bedroom, I ordered, "Go take a shower and get some sleep, I'll clean this up." To make ends meet, Arthur drove the night shift for a cab company. During the day, he worked a second job as a line cook at a diner down the street, from 10:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., just to bring in an extra $50 a day. It was past 9 in the morning. He had barely an hour to rest his eyes. I began frantically tidying the living room. When I glanced up, he was still standing there, staring at me in disbelief. "Go on," I urged. "What are you waiting for?" Arthur gave me a deeply suspicious look, before silently retreating into the bedroom. After scrubbing the living room, I stepped into my daughter's room. Calling it a room was generous. It was a tiny alcove separated from the living room by a thin partition. It barely fit a twin bed and a narrow desk. There wasn't even enough floor space for a chair. Mia had to sit on the edge of her mattress just to do her homework. Yet, despite the squalor, she kept her tiny sanctuary immaculately clean. Her dirty school uniform was neatly folded on the bed. As I reached to grab it for the laundry, my eye caught the edge of a worn notebook tucked under her pillow. The spine was frayed, heavily handled. I hesitated, guilt gnawing at me, but my desperation to understand her pushed me forward. I opened it to the latest entry. "Today is Jason and my birthday. Jason boiled some instant ramen for us. Dad hasn't come back from his night shift yet. He looks so thin lately, but all the money he makes working day and night gets taken by that woman and given to her brother's family. Jason and I both wish Dad would just divorce her, but he keeps saying just wait a little longer. I don't know how much longer he can take it." I slowly closed the diary, my soul exiting my body, leaving me a hollow, walking corpse. Yesterday was Jason and Mia's birthday. They were twins. 13 years ago, I had eagerly anticipated their arrival with all the love in the world, yet 13 years later, I couldn't even remember the day they were born. But the most damning truth of all, yesterday was also my niece Chloe's birthday. I hadn't just remembered it. I had bought an expensive custom cake and spent the entire afternoon cooking a massive feast in my brother's kitchen. The dam broke. I stumbled into the cramped bathroom, cranked the sink faucet on full blast to drown out the noise, sank to the cold tile floor, and wept until I felt like my heart would physically tear out of my chest. By the time Arthur woke up from his brief nap, I had a hot meal waiting on the table. A rich, steaming bowl of beef and pickled cabbage stew. It was his absolute favorite, but it had been years since I had bothered to make it for him. When he saw the bowl, the suspicion in his eyes deepened into alarm. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Eat quickly," It'll get cold, I managed to say. He pulled out the chair and sat, but didn't touch his spoon. Instead, he locked eyes with me. What exactly are you trying to do? My eyes instantly flooded with hot tears. Can't I just be good to you? Seeing me cry, panic flashed across Arthur's tired face. That is not what I meant. You're just acting very different today. I glared at him, putting on my usual abrasive armor to deflect my crushing guilt. Do I have to scream at you every day for you to be happy? No, then eat. Eat so you have energy to work, I snapped. I saw his expression instantly ice over. I knew he had misunderstood, assuming this was just another one of my manipulative mood swings. But I couldn't explain. How could I? Should I tell him I died and came back? That I swore to God I'd stop destroying our family for my brother? He would never believe me. He had no reason to. After Arthur left for his second job, the heavy, suffocating silence of the cramped apartment settled over me. I stood alone in the tiny kitchen, the residual warmth of his presence fading quickly. I didn't have time to wallow in my guilt. Action was the only way to seek redemption. The twins, Jason and Mia, didn't come home for lunch. They ate at the school cafeteria. But the haunting reminder of their forgotten birthday yesterday spurred me into motion. I grabbed my worn canvas tote bag and hurried out of the apartment building, marching toward the bustling neighborhood farmer's market and the nearby bakery. The crisp morning air did little to cool the burning shame in my chest. First, I went to the butcher, selecting prime cuts of beef and fresh vegetables. Ingredients I had previously deemed too expensive for my own children, but would have gladly bought for my brother's family. Then, I stopped by a local bakery and ordered a beautiful double chocolate layer cake, specifically asking them to write Happy 13th Birthday, Jason and Mia, in bright icing. My arms were loaded with heavy grocery bags as I approached the entrance of our decaying apartment complex. But my heart sank, and my blood ran ice cold when I spotted two familiar, predatory figures loitering by the rusty front gates. It was my mother, Martha, and my brother David. I knew they would come hunting for me eventually. Losing out on a $30,000 windfall was not something either of them would take lying down. But I hadn't expected them to ambush me so quickly. It made sense though. To them, my money was their money, and they were desperate to get their hands on it before the housing market outpaced them. The moment Martha spotted me, her eyes locked onto me like a hawk spotting prey. She practically sprinted over, her acrylic nails digging painfully into my forearm. "Jane, what is wrong with you?" she hissed, her voice shrill and demanding. "Didn't we agree that the $30,000 was going to be used for your brother's down payment on his new house?" I didn't flinch. I yanked my arm back with a sudden violent force, breaking her iron grip, and took a deliberate step back. "But Mom," I started, keeping my voice dangerously even. "We don't even own a house ourselves." Before I could even finish my sentence, Martha's face twisted into an ugly sneer of contempt. "The fact that you and that loser husband of yours don't own a house is because you're incompetent." She spat, her voice echoing in the courtyard. "What does your failure have to do with us?" David, standing beside her with his arms crossed, nodded as if she were preaching the gospel. "Mom is absolutely right," he said smoothly, his tone dripping with unearned entitlement. "You guys not having a house shouldn't delay me from buying mine. My wife is sitting at home right now, waiting for me to bring the cash back. Just give me the bank book and your ID, and I'll go to the teller and withdraw it myself." I stared at David's perfectly groomed face. My mind flashed back to the sterile stench of the hospice room in my past life. I remembered lying there, a hollow shell of a woman suffering from a severe illness, begging for help. I remembered that this very brother, the man standing before me demanding my life savings, couldn't even be bothered to visit me once. Instead, he had sent our mother to deliver a bottle of harmful substance to speed up my death. A monstrous, towering hatred erupted inside me, threatening to consume me whole. I realized then that talking to them was a futile waste of breath. Disgusted, I turned my back on them and attempted to walk away, but David wasn't used to being denied. Enraged by my defiance, he lunged forward and grabbed the collar of my jacket. With a forceful push, he sent me stumbling onto the concrete pavement. The grocery bags tore open upon impact, sending expensive cuts of meat, fresh vegetables, and the carefully boxed bakery cake tumbling and rolling across the dirty ground. The apartment complex entrance was a busy intersection of neighborhood life, heavily trafficked by residents coming and going. The sound of my heavy fall and the ensuing commotion instantly drew a crowd. Dozens of eyes turned toward us. An idea sparked in my mind. I rolled onto my side, buried my face in my hands, and let out a loud agonizing wail. "Mom, please. Stop forcing me," I sobbed, pitching my voice to ensure every bystander could hear the desperation. My family of 4 is crammed into a tiny 300-square-foot rental. We can barely breathe. Where am I supposed to find the money to buy a luxury house for my younger brother? Even if you push me to utter despair right here and now, I don't have the cash to give you. In my past life, I was crippled by pride. I cared far too much about saving face and maintaining the illusion of a perfect family to ever make a scene in public. So, when David and Martha saw me writhing on the ground, wailing like a banshee, they froze. They stared at me with wide, horrified eyes, looking as if I had suddenly grown a second head. The crowd of onlookers began to multiply, tightening the circle around us. David was terrified of public humiliation. Seeing the disgusted whispers and pointed fingers of the growing crowd, he panicked, grabbing Martha's sleeve and trying to drag her away. But Martha had absolutely no shame. Completely oblivious to the optics, she aggressively pointed her finger right at my sobbing form. "You are the older sister. Buying a house for your younger brother is the natural order of things. It is your absolute duty. If you don't pay for it, who will?" she shrieked. The crowd erupted in collective outrage. The whispers turned into loud, furious condemnations. "Good Lord, who is this woman?" a bystander loudly mocked. "She is practically shameless. Since when is it a sister's legal responsibility to buy a house for a grown man?" "Exactly," chimed in a stout, older woman in a floral dress. "This mother is clearly too useless to buy her own son a house, so she is trying to bleed her poor daughter dry." "What garbage!" Martha's face flushed a violent shade of purple. She wasn't about to let anyone insult her precious son. She aggressively shoved her way through the crowd, lunging right at the older woman who had spoken up, cursing loudly as she violently pushed the lady in the chest. But the older woman wasn't prepared for the assault. She stumbled backward, lost her footing, and fell hard onto the pavement. Chaos instantly exploded. The older woman began to scream and cry for help. As fate would have it, her son happened to be just across the street. Hearing his mother's terrified screams, he sprinted over. He was a massive, heavily tattooed man with the build of a heavyweight boxer, muscles bulging under his tight shirt. Seeing his mother sprawled on the ground, the giant of a man stepped directly in front of Martha and David, blocking their escape. His shadow completely swallowed them. "You have 2 choices," the man growled, his voice a dangerous, gravelly bass. "Either you get down on your knees and beg my mother for forgiveness right now, or you pay her $1,000 for medical damages." Martha, still high on her own misplaced authority, opened her mouth, ready to unleash a barrage of curses at the newcomer. But the moment she tilted her head back and made eye contact with the towering, muscle-bound man covered in menacing tattoos, her bravado evaporated instantly. She shrank back, suddenly terrified. David, a classic playground bully, who only ever preyed on the weak, was even worse. He stood completely paralyzed, not daring to make a single sound. "What is it gonna be?" the tattooed man barked, stepping closer. "Are you gonna get on your knees and apologize, or are you handing over the cash? Speak up. I have places to be, so stop wasting my damn time." Martha reached out with trembling fingers, desperately tugging at David's jacket, silently pleading for him to handle the situation. David remained entirely motionless. David was a man obsessed with his own ego. There was no way on earth he would willingly drop to his knees in front of a crowd to grovel. He desperately wanted to just pay the man to make the problem go away. But Martha loved money more than she loved life itself. Pulling $1,000 out of her own purse was a fate worse than death. So, the 2 of them remained locked in a pathetic, terrified stalemate. I watched them from the ground, my eyes completely devoid of warmth, laughing mercilessly in my head. The giant man's patience finally ran out. He took a massive step forward, grabbed David by the collar of his expensive jacket, and lifted him onto his tiptoes. "Are you completely deaf, you piece of trash?" he roared right into David's face. "Are you paying up or are you kneeling?" David, practically wetting himself, stuttered out, "Pay? I'll pay the money." "No, we can't pay money. We don't have any money." Before David could even reach for his wallet, Martha suddenly collapsed onto the concrete, right in front of the older woman she had assaulted. Without a second of hesitation, she began aggressively bowing her head, groveling on the dirty pavement. "I'm so sorry. I was wrong, please forgive me. Be the bigger person and let us off the hook this one time," she sobbed, abandoning every shred of human dignity. While all eyes were glued to Martha's pathetic display, I quietly got to my feet. I methodically gathered my spilled groceries, salvaged what I could of the squashed cake, and quietly slipped out of the center of the crowd. I stood at the periphery, watching my mother, the woman who had ordered my death in my previous life, groveling on the ground, desperately begging a stranger for mercy over a few dollars. My heart felt utterly, blissfully hollow. After watching her humiliate herself for a few more moments, I turned my back on the pathetic scene and walked away, my posture straight and my spirit lighter than it had been in decades. I was standing at the cramped kitchen counter, aggressively chopping vegetables and managing several boiling pots, when the familiar squeak of the front door hinges echoed through the apartment. I instantly knew the twins were home from school. I quickly wiped my hands on my apron and rushed out of the kitchen to greet them. Jason was the first to walk through the door. He was holding a plastic bag of cheap takeaway food in his hand. When he saw me standing there, wearing an apron and actively cooking in our kitchen, he froze in his tracks. A look of genuine shock washed over his face, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, hardened mask of indifference. He walked past me without a word, dumping his heavy backpack on the frayed sofa. Mia followed closely behind him. She didn't even grant me a passing glance. Her eyes were fixed on the floor as she walked in a straight line directly toward her tiny partitioned alcove, shutting the makeshift door behind her. I stood alone in the doorway of the kitchen, tears already streaming freely down my cheeks. I looked at them and remembered how completely their lives had been destroyed in the previous timeline because of my twisted priorities. I thought of Jason's hollow, deadened eyes after he lost his leg, drowning in a sea of empty beer bottles. I thought of Mia, strapped to a care center bed, looking at me with absolute horrifying numbness. "What kind of twisted performance are you putting on now?" Jason had walked back into the living room and was standing right in front of me, making absolutely no effort to hide the sheer disgust in his eyes. "Don't you get tired of crying every single day?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. In my past life, in order to maintain my status as the perfect self-sacrificing sister to David, I had resorted to intense emotional manipulation. Whenever my husband or children protested my endless financial hemorrhaging, I would stage dramatic scenes, crying, screaming, even threatening suicide, forcing the three of them into a corner, until they hopelessly gave in to my demands. Standing before me now, Jason clearly believed this was just another one of my psychotic manipulative tantrums. The disgust in his eyes deepened into raw hatred. "How on earth did I end up with a mother like you?" he sneered. He roughly pushed past me and stepped into the cramped kitchen. Inside the narrow space, Jason's eyes landed on the stovetop, where several beautiful complex dishes were already fully prepared. A flash of surprise and something akin to longing crossed his face, but reality quickly snapped him back. Why would she ever cook a feast like this for us, he thought. It was probably just another care package meant to be boxed up and delivered to their spoiled cousin, Chloe. Even though years of neglect had left him numb, a sharp, bitter pang of sorrow still pierced Jason's chest. He and Mia were her biological children, yet they were treated like stray dogs. I quickly wiped away my tears with the back of my hand. Now was not the time to cry. God hadn't given me this miraculous second chance just so I could exact revenge on the people who had wronged me. He had sent me back to pay my debts. The monumental, crushing debts I owed to my children, and to Arthur. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I adjusted my expression and followed Jason into the cramped kitchen. He had just opened a dusty cabinet, reaching for a cheap package of instant ramen. "I already made dinner," I said, stepping past him to turn off the burner. "Go get your sister out here to eat." I carefully lifted the lid off the heavy cast iron pot, letting the rich savory aroma of the slow-cooked chicken stew fill the tiny kitchen. I began ladling the hearty broth and tender vegetables into 2 large bowls. When I finished, I turned around to find Jason still standing frozen in the middle of the kitchen, staring at me as if I had sprouted wings. I glared at him, slipping naturally into my usual gruff persona to mask my trembling hands. "What are you staring at? Don't recognize your own mother?" That completely short-circuited his brain. He stood there, dumbfounded. I shoved 2 plates of freshly roasted vegetables into his hands. "Take these out to the table." Intimidated by my sudden bossiness, Jason didn't dare say a word. He silently carried the plates out into the living room. I followed closely behind, balancing the 2 large bowls of chicken stew. Jason automatically went back to grab the silverware and portion out the rice, a quiet efficiency born of having to fend for himself for so long. But Mia's door remained firmly shut. I walked over to her alcove. The thin makeshift door was slightly ajar. I gently pushed it open, and immediately saw her scramble to hide her worn diary beneath her pillow, throwing her arms over it. "Great 70," I thought with a heavy heart. She's definitely writing about what a monster I am again. I pretended not to notice a thing. "Come out and eat," I called out briskly. Mia quickly emerged, her posture stiff and defensive. The twins sat side by side across the small wobbly dining table. I set a bowl of steaming chicken stew in front of each of them, deliberately using my chopsticks to place a massive tender chicken drumstick right in the center of both their bowls. "Eat up quickly," I instructed. "Finish your food so you can go do your homework." The 2 of them stared down at the giant chicken drumsticks in their bowls, then slowly looked up at me. They exchanged a long, silent, and incredibly suspicious look with each other. Neither of them made a move to pick up their forks. I let out a quiet internal sigh. I didn't push them. Instead, I calmly picked up my own fork and took a large bite of the chicken from my own plate, chewing deliberately. Only after they watched me swallow and confirm that I wasn't falling ill did they finally, hesitantly, pick up their utensils and begin to eat. I stared down at my plate, my throat tightening. My own children actually thought I might have poisoned them. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow. After they finished every last bite of the meal, the 2 of them instinctively stood up and began clearing the table, taking the dirty dishes to the sink to wash. While they were distracted, I walked over to the counter and pulled out the large bakery box I had hidden earlier. I carefully took out the beautiful chocolate birthday cake and pressed the 2 candles, a 1 and a 3, into the thick frosting. When Jason and Mia walked out of the kitchen, wiping their hands on a dish towel, they stopped dead in their tracks. Both of them stared blankly at the elaborate birthday cake sitting in the center of the table. I maintained my fiercely stern expression, crossing my arms over my chest. "We are celebrating yesterday's birthday today as a makeup. You 2 don't have a problem with that, do you?" Mia didn't say a word. She just stared at the flickering flames of the candles. Jason, however, broke the silence. He locked his dark eyes on me, his entire body tense and on high alert. "What exactly are you trying to do?" he demanded. I met his piercing, investigative gaze with complete unflinching honesty. "If I told you that I've washed my hands of my past mistakes, and I'm turning over a new leaf to become a better person, would you 2 believe me?" "No," they practically shouted the word in unison. Without a single second of hesitation, I closed my eyes briefly, accepting the blow. "Fesito. The sins I have committed to earn this thinned." I knew that no matter what I said right now, neither of them would believe a single syllable. Words were cheap, and I had bankrupted my credibility with them years ago, deciding actions were better than arguments. I didn't say another word. I simply turned around and walked into the master bedroom. But before I left, I deliberately left the bedroom door open just a crack. I stood completely still in the dark room, pressing my ear toward the narrow opening. Sure enough, I could hear the twins whispering furiously in the living room. Mia's voice was barely a breath. What is wrong with her today? Has she gone completely crazy, Jason? Do you really believe she is turning over a new leaf? Jason's scoff was sharp and cynical. I'd believe in ghosts before I ever believe her, Mia agreed, her voice laced with anxiety. Then she must be saving up for a massive scheme. She is plotting something huge. We absolutely cannot trust her. Jason, right, I know, but this cake, do you want to eat it? Mia hesitated. Yay, Jason, then we eat it. If we don't eat it, she'll probably just box it right back up and take it to Chloe anyway. Through the crack in the door, I saw Mia cautiously reach out. She gently dipped the tip of her finger into the rich chocolate buttercream and brought it to her lips. A rare, genuinely bright smile broke across her usually guarded face. Jason, the frosting is so sweet, she whispered happily. Yay, have some more, Jason said, his voice softening in a way it never did when he spoke to me. We need to save a slice for Dad, Mia reminded him. I know, I will, Jason promised. In the dim light of the living room, my two beautiful children finally relaxed enough to enjoy their birthday cake. In the suffocating darkness of my bedroom, it felt like someone was taking a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I thought about my past life. My mind and my heart had been entirely consumed by David and his family. I had wanted nothing more than to hold my niece Chloe in the palm of my hand, showering her with endless love, money, and affection, but I had never not even once offered a single ounce of care or protection to my own flesh and blood. They were right not to trust me. I had earned every bit of their suspicion. I deserved it all. Early the next morning, the moment the kids left for school, I grabbed my coat and took a bus straight to the Oak Ridge Estates sales office. Oak Ridge Estates was a brand new residential development on the outskirts of the city. Because its current location was considered somewhat remote and underdeveloped, the opening prices were incredibly low, but I had lived through the next 10 years. I knew a closely guarded secret. By early next spring, the city was going to expand the major highway right past the development, drastically improving the infrastructure. By the following year, one of the top-rated public school districts was redrawing its lines to include this exact neighborhood. The moment Oak Ridge Estates became a highly coveted school zone, the property values were going to skyrocket, like a rocket launching into orbit. In my previous life, it was my brother David who bought a house in Oak Ridge Estates, and I was the one who had drained my own family's life savings to pay his down payment. Clutching the $30,000 cashier's check to my chest, I marched directly into the sales office and finalized the purchase of a second-floor unit with a massive wrap-around balcony. The floor plan was perfect: 3 bedrooms and 2 full bathrooms. With a bright open north to south cross ventilation, it was more than enough space for our family of 4 to finally breathe. I practically floated out of the sales office, a triumphant smile plastered across my face, holding the thick leather binder containing the signed purchase contract. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, I froze. Walking right toward me was Arthur. He stopped dead in his tracks. His hollow, bloodshot eyes dropped immediately to the glossy real estate folder in my hands. A look of absolute devastating despair washed over his exhausted face. You really are here, he choked out, his voice violently trembling as he fought to suppress his rage. Are you really going to push me until I'm dead? Is that what it will take for you to be satisfied? He suddenly lunged forward, his voice cracking into a desperate roar. That was my blood and sweat. What right do you have to buy a house for David? Why? My heart hammered against my ribs. I stepped toward him, desperately wanting to explain. Arthur, please, just listen to me. I'm begging you, Jane, go back in there and get our money back. If you give them everything we have, how are we supposed to survive? Arthur suddenly grabbed both of my arms. This tall, broad-shouldered man, who had always been my rock, had tears streaming down his face, completely abandoning his pride in the middle of the street. We have 2 children. What about our kids? Do you really have the heart to watch them suffer in poverty with us for the rest of their lives? Arthur, Look at it. I screamed his name, cutting through his panic, and aggressively smacked the heavy real estate contract directly against his chest. Open your eyes and look at it. Look at the name on the deed. Arthur recoiled. Stunned by my outburst, he slowly released his agonizing grip on my arms. With trembling fingers, he took the contract binder from my hands and opened it to the signature page. 1 second passed. 2 seconds, 3 seconds. He slowly raised his head, his eyes wide and completely stripped of comprehension, as he stared at me. Why is it my name? Half an hour later, back in the suffocating confines of our tiny apartment, Arthur was sitting rigidly on the edge of the frayed sofa, his large calloused hands gripping the real estate contract, as if it were a fragile artifact. He read it over and over again, his expression locked in a state of bewildered disbelief. How could you? Why would you put my name on this? He finally managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. I walked out of the kitchen, carrying a steaming bowl of his favorite beef noodle soup, and gently set it on the coffee table in front of him. I reached over and softly pulled the contract from his trembling grip. Eat first. Arthur was starving, his body running on fumes. He picked up his fork and began to eat, but his eyes never left my face. I sat down next to him, smoothing my hand over the glossy cover of the contract. Every cent of that $30,000 was earned with your blood, sweat and tears, I said softly, my voice laced with heavy remorse. In the past, I foolishly took everything we earned and poured it into David's pockets. Putting this house in your name is the only right thing to do. Arthur's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He stared at me as if an alien had taken over his wife's body. The silence stretched between us, thick with years of unspoken resentment and newfound confusion. Finally he choked out, Are you being serious? Your name is legally registered on the deed, I replied gently. Do you think I'd joke about something like that? No, it is not that. Arthur set his bowl down entirely. He leaned closer, studying my face with genuine concern. Are you feeling unwell anywhere? He raised a finger and pointed hesitantly at his own head. Should we, maybe go to the hospital and get a scan? Arthur, I shouted, a mix of exasperation and relief flooding through me. You're the one who needs his head checked to make ends meet. I ran a popular hot dog and street food cart right outside the local high school district. That evening was no exception. As the final bell rang for the evening study hall, a sea of exhausted, hungry teenagers flooded the bustling food street. My cart was always a massive hit. The food was hot, delicious, and cheap enough for a student's budget. As I rapidly grilled sausages and toasted buns, I kept anxiously scanning the crowd. Jason and Mia were in 9th grade, and their evening classes had just let out. Knowing they would be starving, I had already bought 2 large portions of premium stir-fried noodles and hot duck soup from a neighboring vendor, setting them aside on a small folding table just for them. Just as I was handing back change to a customer, a loud, obnoxious voice cut through the noise. Don't be shy, girls. This is my family's cart. Take whatever you want. It is all on the house. I looked up to see my precious niece, Chloe, strutting toward my cart with a posse of mean girls trailing behind her. Without so much as a hello, she reached right over the counter and grabbed the expensive stir-fried noodles I had explicitly bought for my own children. She casually handed one of the containers to a girl beside her. See? I told you she'd have my favorite food waiting for me, Chloe bragged. The other girl hesitated, giving me a nervous glance, too intimidated to take the food. Chloe aggressively shoved it into her hands. As she did, another girl in the group whined, Hey Chloe, why does Lily get a box and we don't? Aren't we all best friends? I snapped my head toward the girl who had just complained. The moment I recognized her face, a deafening ringing filled my ears. I froze completely. Lily. In my past life, this was the exact girl who had relentlessly harshly targeted my daughter Mia, driving her into a severe depression that forced her to drop out of school. I never in a million years expected to discover that Mia's tormentor was a close friend of my niece Chloe. The implications hit me like a freight train, freezing the blood in my veins. Noticing my intense, unblinking stare, Lily let out a derisive sneer. What are you staring at? Chloe said you're her family's maid. Is that true? A maid moonlighting at a greasy hot dog cart? She threw her head back and laughed loudly. A cruel, piercing sound. The rest of the clique immediately joined in. Mocking me, Lily smirked and nudged Chloe. Hey Chloe, the three of us are starving too. Why don't you make your maid run to the corner and buy us some noodles too? Chloe didn't even bat an eye. She looked at me dismissively and ordered. Go buy 3 more boxes. They're hungry. I'm treating them today. I stared at her, the hatred rolling off me in waves. Put the food down, I said, my voice dangerously low and cold. Chloe looked confused. What did you just say? I stepped out from behind the cart, reached out, and aggressively snatched the container of noodles right out of her hands. I shot a lethal glare at Lily, who quickly and fearfully surrendered the other box back to me. I placed the food safely back on my folding table. Chloe's face flushed with indignation. What is wrong with you? That food is for me. I let out a harsh barking laugh. Where do you get the nerve? I bought this for Jason and Mia. If you want to eat, buy your own damn food. Have you lost your mind? Chloe shrieked, her eyes wide with humiliation. I am Chloe, yes, you're Chloe, and I am Jane. I am your aunt. Yet you parade around school telling everyone, I'm your servant. I looked at her with pure unadulterated disgust. You are truly a heartless, ungrateful little brat. The loud confrontation had attracted a crowd of students. Whispers immediately broke out. Oh my God, did you hear that? That is her aunt and she called her a maid? I knew it. Chloe told me her family lived in a multi-million-dollar mansion. She is such a pathological liar. Chloe's face burned a furious, humiliating red. She glared at me with venomous hatred. You just wait. I'm telling Grandma about this. She turned to storm off, but suddenly stopped dead. Standing just a few feet away, watching the entire spectacle with wide eyes were Jason and Mia. I spotted them immediately, my cold expression melting into a warm, genuine smile. I waved them over. Mia, Jason, over here. They didn't move at first, still watching me with cautious, guarded expressions. I picked up the hot noodles and duck soup, walked right up to them, and pressed the warm bags into their hands. It is fresh and hot. Take it home and eat it while it is warm. Get to sleep early, and leave your dirty laundry in the basket for me to wash tomorrow. They looked down at the delicious food, then exchanged a quiet, bewildered glance. A girl standing next to Mia, her classmate, spoke up. Mia, is this your mom? Mia looked at me, a flicker of hesitation in her eyes before she gave a small, distinct nod. The classmate smiled brightly. Hi, Mrs. Jane, I'm Mia's desk mate, Emma. Hello, Emma, I beamed overjoyed. You kids must be starving. Hold on, let me grab you some sausages. It is on the house. I quickly grabbed a handful of freshly grilled hot dogs and distributed them to Mia and Jason's friends. A chorus of polite thank yous erupted from the teenagers. As they walked away, I stood there watching them. Suddenly, I heard Emma whisper to Mia. Mia, your mom is so pretty. No wonder you're so gorgeous. You definitely get it from her. I watched as my daughter, for the first time in years, smiled softly and nodded. My heart soared. I felt like I was going to explode with happiness. I turned back to my cart and caught Chloe staring at me with a calculating, malicious glare. I ignored her entirely. Lily, refusing to let the drama end, grabbed Chloe's arm. Hey, don't leave. Isn't this your aunt? Tell her we want free food too. Chloe couldn't afford to lose face in front of her cronies. She marched back up to me and hissed under her breath. I don't know what crazy phase you're going through, but my friends are watching. You swine will give me face right now. I didn't even look up from the grill. Who the hell do you think you are? You, Jane, are you crazy? Believe me, I'll get lost, I barked, utterly humiliated. Chloe fled the scene amidst the raucous laughter of her peers. I turned my attention to Lily, who was laughing the loudest. You're pretty close with Chloe, aren't you? I asked casually. We're desk mates. What do you think? Lily smirked. Desk mates. The revelation clicked into place like a puzzle piece. In my past life I thought Lily bullied Mia out of pure malice. Now I knew the truth. Chloe was the mastermind. She had used Lily as her pawn to destroy Mia. The realization flooded my mouth with the bitter taste of absolute fury. I grabbed a hot dog, wrapped it in a napkin, and handed it to Lily. I smiled. A predator showing its teeth. Chloe talks about you a lot. Lily took a bite. Oh yeah, what does she say? She says you're desperately in love with a boy who wouldn't touch you with a 10-foot pole, because he is actually in love with Timbertez. I lied smoothly, striking her biggest insecurity. She says you're an ugly toad dreaming of eating swan meat, and you aren't even fit to tie that boy's shoes. Lily's face twisted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated rage. That bitch! She screamed. She hitched her backpack over her shoulder and sprinted off into the night, hunting Chloe down. I stood by my cart, watching her retreating figure, my smile fading into a block of solid ice. There was no need to rush. The show was just getting started. The very next morning, Martha dragged David and his heavily perfumed wife, Penelope, right to our front door to ambush me. The moment I opened the door, David lunged at me, his fist raised to strike. Before I could react, Arthur, who had just gotten home from his night shift, stepped firmly in front of me. He grabbed David's wrist in a vice-like grip and violently shoved him backward. "Don't you dare lay a finger on her," Arthur roared. Arthur had served in the military. Though years of poverty had worn him down, he was still 6 feet tall and built solid, easily overpowering the pampered, 5'7" David. David stumbled backward, nearly crashing into the stairwell railing. Seeing her golden boy manhandled, Martha lost her mind. She lunged forward, fingers curled into claws, ready to confront Arthur physically. "Take one more step, and I'm calling the police," I screamed. Martha froze, terrified of authority, and lowered her hands. But her mouth kept running. "Jane, what kind of aunt are you? Why did you humiliate Chloe at your food stand yesterday?" I immediately forced tears into my eyes, adopting a look of profound betrayal. "I have treated Chloe better than my own flesh and blood for 13 years. I spent my hard-earned money on her clothes, her shoes, her luxuries. And how does she repay me? She tells her entire school that I am her maid." I sobbed dramatically, looking directly at David and Penelope. "She refused to call me her aunt, and treated me like garbage in front of everyone. After everything I sacrificed for her." Arthur wrapped a protective arm around my shoulders, glaring at the trio. "Your family is sickening," he spat. David and Penelope looked entirely embarrassed, unable to defend the indefensible. But Martha scoffed. "She is just a child. Why are you being so petty, Jane?" I abruptly stopped crying and glared at the heavy gold bracelet on Martha's wrist. "I'm petty? Then give me back the gold bracelet I bought for you." I lunged forward as if to rip it off her arm. Martha shrieked and scrambled behind David for cover. Penelope quickly stepped in to play the peacemaker. "Jane, calm down. Chloe was definitely in the wrong, and I'll discipline her when I get home." Looking at Penelope's hypocritical face, I suddenly remembered a fascinating secret from my past life. David and Penelope had 2 kids, Chloe, the eldest, and little 3-year-old Leo, the absolute apple of the family's eye. Martha treated Leo like royalty, parading him around town as the superior male heir. But the truth, a truth only discovered years later in my previous life, was that Leo wasn't David's son. He was the product of Penelope's secret, ongoing affair with an old flame. When the truth finally came out back then, Penelope divorced David, took half his assets, and married her lover, putting Martha in the hospital with a stress-induced stroke. Right now, nobody knew. It was my ultimate trump card. I couldn't help but smile. A cold, terrifying smile. "What are you laughing at?" Penelope asked, looking deeply unsettled. "I'm laughing," I said, locking eyes with David, "because some people in this world are completely blind to the horns growing on their own heads." Penelope's face instantly drained of color. Martha aggressively pushed past her, completely missing the subtext. "Stop talking in riddles. We didn't come here about Chloe. We came here for the $30,000. We're touring houses today." "What 30,000? I shrugged smoothly. "I don't have it anymore. I already spent it." "Spent it?" Martha screamed, her eyes bugging out of her skull. "Are you insane? What could you possibly buy with 30 grand? I looked at Arthur, a genuine smile touching my lips. Arthur stood tall and replied, "We bought a house." The silence that followed was absolute. Martha, David, and Penelope stood frozen, their jaws practically on the floor. In the end, we did have to call the police. Martha threw a violent tantrum. David tried to attack me again, and Penelope wailed, as if I had stolen the money directly from her purse. As the police officers escorted them away, Martha was still screaming, "Jane, you ungrateful wretch! You traitorous wolf! I am legally severing my ties with you. You are no longer my daughter." "Wait," I yelled, pulling out a pre-written severance agreement and an ink pad from my pocket. I rushed over, grabbed her thumb, and pressed it onto the ink, and then onto the document. I held the document up to the crowd of gossiping neighbors. "Everyone bears witness. She said it herself." The neighborhood cheered. The older woman Martha had assaulted the day prior clapped loudly. Good riddance. A family of bloodsuckers. With the police driving my toxic family away, I finally breathed freely. Over the next few months, our lives transformed. We poured everything into renovating our new apartment at Oak Ridge Estates. We did most of the labor ourselves to save money, with Arthur and I laying the flooring side by side. During summer break, I brought the twins to see the finished home. When I unlocked the door, they gasped. I pointed down the hall. "The left room is for Jason, the right room is for Mia." I followed Mia to her door. In my past life, I had read her diary entries longing for a beautiful private space. When she opened the door, she found a fully decorated soft pink princess room. She stood there, completely overwhelmed. That night at dinner, for the first time in her life, Mia used her chopsticks to place a piece of meat into my bowl. "You've worked hard lately," she mumbled, blushing furiously. "Eat more." I burst into tears of pure joy. Of course the peace didn't last. Chloe, having heard we bought a house, showed up demanding the keys so she could throw a party for her friends. I told her to get lost. A few days later, my spare keys mysteriously vanished. When the property manager called me to complain about a raging party in my empty unit, I knew exactly what had happened. Arthur and I stormed the apartment with security. The place was trashed, filled with teenagers. When I confronted Chloe sternly for breaking and entering, her crush, a wealthy, arrogant boy named Kevin, tried to defend her, claiming it was the Harry house. I humiliated them both. I proved I was the owner, and threatened to have them all arrested for trespassing. Realizing Chloe was a fraud who lived in a cramped rental, and had lied about her wealth, Kevin looked at her with utter disgust. "You played me?" Kevin sneered, shaking off her desperate grip. "You're just a broke, lying loser." As her social circle abandoned her, Chloe looked at me with demonic hatred. "You'll get your karma, Jane." Karma, I thought. I already served my sentence in hell. Now, it is your turn, friend. To change Jason's academic trajectory, I had Mia rigorously tutor him all summer. When the school year started, Mia maintained her spot as the top student, and Jason miraculously shot up to the top 20 in his class. Chloe, meanwhile, plummeted to the bottom. To celebrate, I took the twins out for a steak dinner. While we were eating, I glanced out the window and saw Lily and Kevin, Chloe's former crush, walking hand in hand into a cheap motel across the street. I quickly snapped a photo and saved it to my phone. When the house was fully ventilated, we officially moved in. But Martha wasn't done. She showed up at our door, dragging Penelope's son, Leo, behind her. She burst into tears, begging for forgiveness, insisting she just wanted to stay with us for a few days to reconnect. She immediately demanded that Jason give up his room and sleep on the sofa. "Absolutely not," I said, slamming the door in her face. Determined to play the victim, she set up a sleeping bag in our hallway. Fearing complaints, Arthur let her sleep in the living room. Knowing exactly what she was up to, I secretly installed a nanny cam in my bedroom and the living room. The trap was set. On Monday, while the house was empty, the cameras caught Martha sneaking into my bedroom and stealing my wedding jewelry and the emergency cash in my drawer. Leo was caught on camera swiping Mia's new tablet. I took the footage straight to the police. Martha was arrested on felony theft charges, and all our belongings were recovered. David and Penelope showed up at the police station, Screaming hysterically, blaming me for traumatizing Leo, Penelope charged at me like a rabid dog. I easily dodged her and looked straight at David. "You always complain that Leo looks nothing like you," I said loudly, ensuring the entire lobby heard. "Have you ever wondered if there is a biological reason for that?" Penelope froze, her face turning chalk white. "Jane, you liar. Stop spouting garbage. If he is not David's son, whose is he?" "I don't know," I smirked. "But maybe the front desk clerk at the Starlight Motel on Fifth Avenue does. You are quite the regular there on Tuesday afternoons, aren't you?" David's world stopped spinning. He looked at his wife's terrified, guilty face. The truth hit him like a physical blow. With a roar of animalistic fury, he grabbed Penelope by her hair and dragged her out the door, screaming that he was getting a DNA test immediately. Martha was locked up for 30 days. But the day she was released, she completely lost her mind. The DNA test confirmed the truth. In a blind, uncontrollable rage over the betrayal, David severely beat Penelope, resulting in a life-altering injury. He was arrested for murder and sentenced to life without parole. Martha's precious family was entirely destroyed. As for Chloe, the revelation of her family's collapse and her own lies made her the ultimate target at school. She was subjected to vile hazing by her peers, finally suffering a complete mental breakdown. I signed the papers to commit her to a care facility, placing her in the exact same facility I had put Martha in. Lily didn't escape her fate either. The consequences of her motel visits caught up to her. During a routine school physical, it was discovered she was 6 months pregnant. The scandal became a massive public outrage. Unable to handle the crushing pressure and shame, she suffered a tragic, life-altering fall from the school's roof. Years passed in the blink of an eye. Mia graduated at the top of her class and was accepted into an Ivy League university on a full scholarship. Jason entered the police academy, determined to build a righteous life. Arthur and I had pooled our savings to open a medical supply manufacturing company just before the global pandemic hit. The timing was a stroke of divine intervention. Our mask production skyrocketed, and we built a legitimate fortune. One rainy afternoon, I received a call from the care center. Chloe was demanding to see me. I went, separated by thick, reinforced glass. Chloe stared at me with hollow, sunken eyes. Her face was twisted with absolute madness. "Jane," she hissed, her voice vibrating with manic desperation. "You were reborn too, weren't you?" I tilted my head, feigning perfect innocence. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Stop lying," she screamed, slamming her hands against the glass. "I know you were reborn. That is the only way you could have destroyed us. Mia's life was supposed to be mine, her wealth, her education. It was all supposed to be mine. Give it back. Give it back," she shrieked with intense frustration. Orderlies rushed into the room, restraining her and preparing a sedative. I stepped back into the shadows, out of her line of sight. I looked at the miserable broken girl who had once stolen my daughter's future, and I smiled. I turned my back on the past, walked out of the care facility, and stepped into the bright, beautiful sunlight of my new life.